In today's video, we're once again going to be making some predictions for the upcoming Stanley Cup playoffs. We're going to take a look at the standings as of today and say if the playoffs started today, what would the playoff matchups be? Take a look at how everything would play out and give you my predictions on who would win Eastern and Western Conference, meet in the Stanley Cup final, and ultimately my cup winner. All that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, today we're taking a look at the Stanley Cup playoff matchups as of today. This video is being recorded on Thursday. We won't make it to YouTube probably till Friday, maybe Saturday. The standings before Thursday night's games get underway is what we're going by here. So there could be a slight difference depending on how some of these games go. A lot of the placements are going to remain the same. But if you take a look at the standings right now, according to NHL.com, let's take a quick peek here. In the Eastern Conference, the top seed is going to be the Washington Capitals. They are most likely going to stay in that spot, not only leading the Metro, but leading the Eastern Conference. So they will be the number one seed. They will play whoever is wildcard 2. As of right now, that is the Columbus Blue Jackets. The 2-3 spot in the Metro would be the Carolina Hurricanes and the New Jersey Devils. And then in the Atlantic Division, right now we'd have the Florida Panthers doing battle with the Ottawa Senators versus Wildcard 1. And then the 2-3 spot would be the Toronto Maple Leafs against the Tampa Bay Lightning. Over in the Western Conference, you're going to have the Winnipeg Jets. Looks like they're going to be the most likely pretty clear-cut winner here, being the number one seed in the Western Conference. It's going to be between Washington and Winnipeg for the President's Trophy, who's going to be the top team overall. So the Winnipeg Jets would play the Calgary Flames. They would get wildcard 2 right now, being the top team. So they are number one versus the Flames. You would get Dallas versus Colorado as your 2-3 spot in the Metro. And then, of course, you get in the Pacific Division right now, the Vegas Golden Knights are the division leaders. They would play the Minnesota Wild, who are in wildcard 1 spot. And then once again, we'd have Edmonton against Los Angeles in that 2-3 spot for the 4th year in a row. So certainly lots of spots that are pretty secure. There's a few spots here that are definitely up for grabs. The wild card races in both the East and the West are still very interesting. Like I said, as I record this right now, the Senators have a 3-point clearance on the Blue Jackets, and then they have another couple of points on everybody else above them. So for the most part, Ottawa's somewhat secure, but there's still a lot of runway here. A major losing streak could certainly still screw things up for them. Same thing with Columbus. And Ottawa and Columbus actually play 3 times down the stretch here. So they could be jockeying with position with each other here as well, depending on how those games go. If one team dominates the other, it could even knock one out of the playoffs, depending on how teams like Boston, Detroit, Montreal all seem to do, in the Rangers in that mix too. So lots of interesting matchups, lots of runway here left, and there still could be some changes to this. But if they start today, I'm going to give you my predictions and thoughts of who would win each of these series. Let's start with the Eastern Conference. Like I said, our biggest, most lopsided matchup would be Washington versus Columbus. The Capitals right now, based on how everything sits, I think the Caps have a pretty good path. Not only have they been the most dominant team in their division, which is leading them to be the top overall team in the Eastern Conference, I think they might have a pretty good path here to make a good run. The Capitals, I think, would overpower the Blue Jackets. They'd have the advantage on the blue line. They'd have the advantage between the pipes. They would have the advantage as a deeper team up front in the forward group as well. I think Columbus could find a way to make it interesting, but I really don't think it would be all that close. I think Washington would maybe five games, maybe 6 if the Jackets are fortunate. But at the end of the day here, the Capitals are going to be going in riding high, especially if Ovi breaks that record. And I think they're going to have a good path here to do some damage. Then we'd have the Carolina against New Jersey. Now, the Devils are in tough. We just found out today that Dougie Hamilton's regular season is over and his playoffs are in jeopardy as well. GM Tom Fitzgerald said that Hamilton, if he is able to return, probably not in the first round. He said it was maybe round 2. So the Devils would have to get to round 2 for him to even have a chance to come back. I'm not so sure they're going to get there. They're already without Jack Hughes, who had to have a major shoulder surgery. His season and playoffs are completely over. So the Devils are in trouble. Their top defenseman, arguably, and their top offensive producing forward gone. That's a major, major blow. Carolina, yeah, you could say the whole Rantanen thing might have messed them up a little bit. But you know what? Logan Stankoven's come in. He's doing well. And the team is still playing at a higher level. At least that what they do have is pretty healthy. They're not dealing with anything too significant that way. I think Carolina would take New Jersey out. I might have felt different about that matchup earlier in the season, but given what New Jersey's gone through and where things are at with the Canes, even without Rantanen in that trade, I think Stankoven's going to do better than people expected. And I think Carolina is still going to be able to get at least a little bit further than what people might think. So I'm going to say Carolina over New Jersey, setting up a round 2 matchup of Washington against Carolina. Now, before we get into round 2 and just the conference, let's look at the round 1 matchups in the Atlantic. So we'd have Florida against Ottawa, Toronto against Tampa. Now, this is probably going to be a controversial take. This is probably going to be one that gets a lot of comments and probably, disagreeing with me, but that's okay. But I'm picking Ottawa to upset Florida. We're going to have the battle of the Tkachuk brothers if this holds true and this happens. And Brady Tkachuk has been an absolute animal. He was the dominant player of all the dominant players at the 4-nation face-off tournament, by far getting the most attention, being the most dominant. He was built for this, and he hasn't had a chance to do it yet. Since he's come back from 4 nations, he's been such an even more dominant player than usual for the Senators. The Sens have been doing extremely well. They made some big trades at the deadline. They're a lot deeper. They've got a former Vezina Trophy winning goaltender, and I know that they've had their struggles with Florida in the past, but they are not the same team that the Florida Panthers have played. And the other thing with Florida, even though Florida's made some moves here as well, and you could argue that they're as good or better as last year, they are also very banged up. So I still don't think their blue line is as good as it was last year. Seth Jones might be re-energized to get out of Chicago. Chicago, I think, was energized to move on from Jones. I still don't know that the blue line is really that good. I think last year's version was definitely better. I'm not saying it's bad. I just don't know if it's good enough to be a Stanley Cup winner again. In the forward group, you got Marchand comes over. He's expected to play with Tkachuk and Bennett. If that becomes a line, that could be a real pain in the butt. But are they even how healthy? There's been a lot of injuries on this Florida team. I don't even know Matthew Tkachuk's full status. We know that Bill Zito said they were hopeful to get him back in the playoffs. So will he be ready for game 1? I don't know. Will he be 100% if he plays? That's a tough question. I just think this team has played a lot of hockey in the last couple of years. They went to the finals and they lost. Then they went to the finals and they won. They, back-to-back shortened off seasons. You add some more depth this year, sure, but it's older depth that's not getting any younger. Not that I don't like the moves, but I just think that this team might run out of gas. They're banged up now, and you have a younger, energized Ottawa team coming in, like I said, with a Vezina Trophy winning goalie and Linus Ullmark. The depth they've added and the moves they made at the deadline has proven very good so far in the few games we've seen since then, and Brady Tkachuk is on an absolute mission. That's why I think this might be one of the series as prime for an upset. I think Brady might take down Big Brother Matthew in this series. Maybe I'm crazy, but I think it could happen. Toronto versus Tampa. Toronto's beaten Tampa in the playoffs before. I think they can do it again. The Lightning have had a better season than I expected them to. I didn't expect them to be bad, but I thought between Tampa and Boston, we were likely going to see one of those two teams fall off and kind of end up either in a wild card race or maybe out of the playoffs like we've seen with the Bruins. Obviously, the Lightning have made some moves to make sure that didn't happen. They probably, you can fair to say, managed their roster better than Boston did in that regard. But I think at the end of the day, Toronto is pretty solid here. They've added some good stuff as well. And I think the Leafs can once again take Tampa out. They've got some great coaching in Craig Berube. I think they've learned a lot about how they need to play. He's not going to let any kind of soft play exists. They have a much more demanding coach in Berube. Some of these guys like Marner and Tavares are playing for contracts too. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Toronto have a really good playoff here. So Toronto over Tampa, setting up the Battle of Ontario in round 2. So now you've got Washington, Carolina, Toronto, Ottawa. Washington, Carolina, I think would go to Washington. Carolina, like I said, no Rantanen. That whole thing got bumbled up. I still think they're a good team, but I don't think they're as deep as they need to be to make a deeper run in the playoffs. Washington seems to have the depth. They have the goaltending. They're getting it from all places right now. They get good coaching with Spencer Carberry, and I think this Capitals team has a clear path through the Metro side of the playoff bracket to make it to at least the Eastern Final. So I think Washington is the team to beat on that side of things. Toronto, Ottawa would be very interesting. My gut would want to say, that Toronto should win. They're the more experienced team. They've been through the playoffs a lot more than these Senators players have been. But, at the same time, if Toronto or Ottawa, can upset Florida, they typically play the Leafs very well. You would think there could be an upset there again. I would see it going right to the wire. Can see it being a 7-game series. I don't know that Ottawa is going to be able to have that much success in the first year in the playoffs. I know there's people that would love to see it, but I think that the Leafs would squeak that one out. But I think they would make it very interesting, and I think it would be a very hard-fought, long series with maybe the Leafs getting just the edge. But I think the Sens would be borderline able to upset them, to be honest. And if Ottawa, and if the standings change a little bit, and we end up with Ottawa, Toronto in the first round as well, I do think that any of those teams, I think, could be upset by the Senators, but we will see. They have to get there first, and they have to put their, get their experience, which a lot of them don't have just yet. So we'll see. So let's set up a Toronto versus Washington Eastern Conference Final. As much as the Washington story has been good, I think that's where it ends. I think Toronto would be equipped well to take out the Capitals between the goaltending duo. I think that the Leafs could outbattle them in that sense. It would be close though, given that of course Thompson and Lindgren have been good for the Capitals. I think the blue line would be interesting, and then of course you get the forward group, and I think you'd have more offense coming from Toronto. I just think that they'd be poised for a bigger run here. I just don't know that Washington, they still have a lot of older players too. I think they'd run out of steam here, and the Leafs would be able to pull it out. So I would say in this scenario, it creates a path for the Leafs or the Capitals to go to the Cup final. Like I said, if you get Ottawa upsetting a team like Florida early on, and then the whole stuff that's gone down between Carolina and New Jersey, it really makes that path in the Eastern Conference really down to a couple of teams that could come out of it. So right now, based on this, I'd pick the Leafs to win the East. Now in the Western Conference, like I said, you're going to have Winnipeg versus Calgary. As a Canadian, it's unfortunate to see two Canadian teams play each other in the first round. You like to see as many Canadian teams advance as you can because there's not very many of them. But Winnipeg versus Calgary, I don't think would be an overly close matchup. I think the Jets would be able to take the Flames down in short order, probably in 4 to 5 games. Dallas versus Colorado could be an absolute slobber knocker. That could be a 7-game fight to the death here. I mean, I would pick Colorado to win. And based on Dallas getting Mikko Rantanen, that would be an interesting matchup as well. Rantanen against his former club. But the Avalanche have made some good moves as well to really secure things. Has Jake Ottinger been playoff tested and playoffs, had that playoff success yet? Not that you think is possible. And then you get the Avalanche with a new goaltending tandem as well. Again, a little bit unproven for playoff hockey, but they've done it before with Darcy Kemper. This team added a lot of depth down the middle, a lot of experience depth down the middle at that. Hopefully, everything stays good with Val Nichushkin. They've lost him in the playoffs for a couple times now, so if they can get through the playoffs with him, and then you add that extra depth in there as well, even without Rantanen, I think they're overall a more balanced, deeper team. And with Dallas, there's still a couple question marks too for me on their blue line. They do have some good defenders back there. The health of Heiskanen is a little bit concerning. I know he's probably going to be back, but as of right now, I would lean towards Colorado. to win that series, but I think it would be very tough, tight, and long series. That would set up Winnipeg versus Colorado in round 2. Now, on the Pacific side of it, you got Vegas would play Minnesota, Edmonton would play LA. I think Vegas would handle Minnesota relative ease, to be honest. I think Vegas is a team that's very, you don't hear about it as much as being a cup contender, but they very much are. They're very much going to be in the mix here, and they would stand a good chance to win a few rounds in this Western Conference playoff hunt. So Vegas, to me, they would probably be better than Minnesota in most areas, and they would take the series probably in 6 games. Edmonton, LA for the 4th year in a row. I have no reason to think it would end any differently. I think the Oilers are poised for another deep run here. Los Angeles Kings, I think, would be in tough. Again, they're not really that much of a different team than the Oilers have faced before. So without really making substantial changes, I don't know that we really have any reason to believe that the outcome, like I said, would be any different. So I'm taking Vegas and Edmonton to win those 2 series, which would set up Vegas versus Edmonton in round 2, and of course Colorado versus Winnipeg. Now, the Jets versus Avs are interesting. Part of me thinks that Winnipeg should be able to win the Western Conference, or at least go to the Western Conference final, but this Avalanche team has been doing a lot better lately. It took them a while to find their goaltending. That's now in place. They've made some other moves to address their depth and their scoring, and down the middle, especially with Brock Nelson, Charlie Coyle moves. Like I said, Nichushkin hopefully will be there through the entire playoffs. I don't know that the Jets can overcome the Avalanche. We saw what happened last year. Now, I know it was kind of a unique scenario there in a sense, but I don't have enough. I mean, I would love to be proven wrong because I'd love to see the Jets have more success. At the same time, that Avalanche team led by Nathan MacKinnon, it's just so hard to bet against them. I think the Avalanche would take the Jets out in a long, hard-fought series. Edmonton against Vegas, I would pick the Oilers to win that series. I do think that the Oilers have a good chance of making it back. Again, the Golden Knights are a team that you can't take lightly, and in all honesty, they're also a team that I think could be fragile to injuries. We don't know how things are going to go, but they have a lot of players on that team that have dealt with things this year, whether it be Theodore, Pietrangelo, William Karlsson. Mark Stone hasn't had the LTIR, time like he normally does. Is he going to be able to get through the playoffs healthy? I have a concern there because he hasn't had his February break like he normally has. So I would pick Edmonton to take out Vegas in that sense. Setting up McDavid versus McKinnon, Colorado versus Edmonton in the Western Conference final. And I would take the Oilers to win that match as well. I honestly said, I've been saying it since last year, and I don't have any reason to believe I'm wrong. I think the Oilers are getting back to the Stanley Cup final for the 2nd year in a row, and I think we might have a different outcome this time. So, in all honesty, the Oilers and Avalanche would be a highly entertaining series. I'd love to see McDavid and McKinnon go head-to-head for 6 or 7 games. I think the Avalanche would have probably a slight edge in goal, but definitely an edge in offense on the other side of things, and it's tough to stop when you've got Draisaitl, McDavid, and their supporting cast going strong. That's a really, well-oiled machine, if you will. Play on words there, a little pun for you. So to me, I'm taking Edmonton, even though I think it would be a really, really hard-fought series. That would set up an all-Canadian matchup, if I'm right, of Toronto versus Edmonton, which guarantees the Cup to come to Canada for the first time in over 30 years. I think Edmonton would beat Toronto, though, in a Stanley Cup final. We then would have McDavid against Matthews and Marner. Leon and Connor against Marner and Matthews would be a really fun matchup, to be honest. I think Edmonton's experience and dealing with everything last year will help them kind of learn what they need to do and certainly lock things down. I think Edmonton would, based on what they showed in the playoffs last year, I think that Toronto would be a team that they could definitely beat. But it would be a very interesting all-Canadian matchup. It could have a long-lasting outcome of what happens with key Toronto UFAs like Marner and Tavares. But I think Connor McDavid gets his cup this year. That's my prediction. I've been saying it for a long time. I'm sticking to it. I don't have any reason to think at this point that things are going to be different. But if I do get to that point, I'll certainly won't be afraid to change my mind. But let me know your thoughts on, if the playoffs started today, who are you picking to win some of these series and ultimately the Stanley Cup. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.